So today we're going to begin our look this week at Luke chapter 20, and we're going to look at these first. Yesterday we sort of started in the Sunday Connection taking a look at this exchange that Jesus had in the first 8 verses with the religious leaders, where they asked him the question about where he found the authority, who gave him the authority to say and do the things he'd been doing in and around the temple. And Jesus doesn't really seem to give them much of an answer, but actually, while they're trying to formulate some sort of clever response to get out of the question, Jesus tells them this parable. In Luke chapter 20, it's verses 9 through 19. And in this, he tells a parable that in essence, he does answer the question of where he gets the authority to do the things he's doing. And he tells a parable about a vineyard with some tenants, and that there's an owner of the vineyard who sends some landlords, some managers to come and to collect the rents, and the tenants treat them badly. And the Jewish people, especially those religious leaders who would have known the scriptures very well, would have recognized the story that Jesus was telling very quickly, because actually it would sound very familiar to them, like the story told in Isaiah chapter 5, where actually Isaiah tells a very similar, I think it's a song or a story, a parable, where God is speaking to the nation of Israel. And at the end of this story in Isaiah chapter 5, Isaiah actually unpacks it, and he tells them that the vineyard is Israel. And so in this story, Jesus uses very similar language that would have been unmistakable to those religious leaders. They would have known that he was speaking to them directly. And again, in Jesus' story about the vineyard, it's the nation of Israel that's being represented. And the tenants are represented by the leaders of Israel, that they're the ones who should be caring for the nation of Israel, caring for the vineyard. And in the story then, God is the owner of the vineyard, right? God is the creator of mankind. And so he sends people, prophets, sends these managers, these landlords, again and again. And the religious leaders reject again and again and again. And so Jesus, within this parable, answers their question about who gave you authority. If you notice, in Luke chapter 20, in verse 13, the owner of the vineyard says, "What shall I do?" He sent as many people as he can, and they beat them up, and they get increasingly violent. And so the owner is surprisingly patient, actually, in the face of this kind of violence and this kind of insolence. But the owner says, "What can I do?" And he says, "I will send my son whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him." It's unmistakable to those religious leaders that Jesus is calling himself the Son of God, that he is claiming to be God's Son, the Messiah sent from God to rescue the nation of Israel. So they would have been very angry at hearing this. And yet Jesus is saying this. Who's given me authority? He says, God himself has given me authority. I was sent from God as the Messiah to rescue you. That is the basis of his authority. So within the story, he does end up answering their question. But as we listen to this story, this isn't just a back and forth between the religious leaders and Jesus, but actually I believe that this is a conversation that can be had with us. It isn't just these terrible Jewish leaders who are doing these terrible things to Jesus, but actually there's a lesson for us to be learned in this parable, that God not only made the nation of Israel, but God created all of us. That God, the world that we live in, is the vineyard that God made, and we are the tenants of that vineyard. And God sends people to us. God has sent Jesus for us, but God sends people to tell us the good news about Jesus. And we have a choice again and again and again. Will we accept or will we reject what we hear? And you'll notice in the story, the response to the owner, when the owner goes to send his son, what the tenants say in verse 14 is, when the tenants saw him, this is the son, they talked the matter over. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." You see, the real problem here, the real sin of these tenants, was not just that they were violent, not just that they were disobedient, but that they wanted to be owners. They didn't just want to be a tenant, they wanted to have ownership themselves. They said, we don't want to be accountable to anyone. We don't want to have to listen to anyone. And so if we can kill the Son, then we can have ownership of the world. We can own this space ourselves, and we don't have to answer to anyone at all. And really, this is at the heart of most of our rejection of Jesus, that when the gospel comes to us, there's a question of our submission, of our obedience. Do we say, I want to not answer to anyone. I want to be responsible for myself. I'm not going to answer to God. I don't need to do what God says. Or do we respond with submission? Do we respond with obedience? You see, Jesus tells this story, and it's an opportunity for us to be obedient, to say, I'm not going to try to usurp God's authority, but rather I'm going to recognize that I don't deserve this gift, and I'm going to accept Jesus as the gift that he is and learn what it means to be obedient to the one who made me.